Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. William White, yes, an official member of the Midnight Society science team. You, again, have found your way into the shadows, as well as the darkness, in an attempt to awaken me from my slumber, so that way we can again go hunt werewolves and dogmen. Absolutely delicious. I do appreciate you allowing me to replenish lost nutrients. Well, without further ado, it is time for Mr. William White and LordeStarfox to venture into the darkness.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf. And everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night. Yes, once again, it is midnight lycanthropy time on LordeStarfox Radio, the home and the stomping ground of the Midnight Society. We do have one of our bi-weekly hosts, a very great friend of mine, also a scientist who helps us figure out what in the heck is occurring as we again sit around the late night fire and burn the timber into the early hours of the morning. Mr. White, how you been, bro?
Can't complain. Life's been treating me pretty well.
Excellent. This is good. How's everything on the end of cryptids your way? I know you stay pretty busy, and you said that you really hear the majority of your Dogman stuff per se when I'm sending you topics or such, but have you heard of anything pretty cool lately? Or
I can't say that I have. I think things have been fairly quiet around here as far as I know. So nothing's popped up on my radar in the Ohio, Kentucky area.
Heck yeah, that's good. No, I've been getting some pretty interesting stuff that we're still trying to figure out, and as if it's actually legitimate or someone just yanking some change. But we always got emails coming in. I've been doing some really great stuff with Small Town Monsters. I got Heather and Aaron coming on again next week to update me on some of the epic stuff that they're working on. So it's pretty great that way as well.
Oh, that's cool. That's exciting.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I mean, you're one of the OGs that started off with me here at the Midnight Society when I only had, I could count on half of my fingers how many people I had that wanted to come hang out with me. But now fast forward, I can use all my toes and my fingers, and I always have great people now that consistently want to come hang out. No, I appreciate the loyalty for sure, man.
It's been fun. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Heck yeah, my guy. Well, you obviously are going to be pretty versed on this topic, and I assume, again, even though I preach assumptions are never good, the majority of the audience is going to have heard of what we're diving into tonight, yet there's some sort of strange spin going on that I have not been able to fully grasp my brain around. Also, though, I am not in a lot of these Spanish-based cultures where they're talking about it, and I have not really had a chance to speak directly to a lot of them, whereas you have, someone that you enjoy dearly who's part of your family that is from a Spanish-based culture that would potentially have actually a little bit more consensus as to what's going on. So that rang into my head too. William's going to be a good guy to talk about this. We're going to dive into the El Chupacabra. Yet before we let you really go gnarly on this, because you are the brainiac here, I wanted to just bring up a couple little small things for the audience to get a grasp as to what we're going to try to figure out here. Meaning, if people dive into the El Chupacabra lore, it first started off as this bipedal reptile looking thing that had a very ironic appearance to the movie Species. Anyone out there, it's a, well, interesting movie, let's just put it that way, in many different aspects. Yet the woman who saw this, El Chupacabra, had just got done watching Species.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, yeah, did she see something outside? Most likely she did. But what's the first thing her brain went to? Obviously, this crazy looking reptile thing, because she had just witnessed this. It's no different than when, per se, you and I have been talking about something. I go to editing, get up, it's like 3 a.m, and some deer run through the yard. Once I gather my bearings, oh, those are deer. But at first you're like, what the heck is that huge shadow? And
Right.
I wonder why. You were just reading crazy encounters of people missing. Okay. But now it's not really being described as this. The similarity aspect of the blood missing is still tagging along, which isn't really paranormal based. Blood is something a lot of animals will lap up, etc. We'll get into that. But now we have this purple, mangy looking
Coyote type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, canine with blue eyes and strange long fangs. What the heck? Is it just the term El Chupacabra is a broad term that we're missing here? Or has the narrative changed, do you feel?
I think the narrative changed. First off, like we kind of talked about with the Dogman and some of the other paranormal entities, it does seem, we kind of speculated that it seems like they may change their appearance based on our expectations, so, is it possible that this thing appeared to her as something similar to, the movie? Yeah, it's possible because she had just watched it. Had she just watched American Werewolf in London, maybe she would have seen a Dogman-like thing, right? And then the question is, was that just in her head, or is that how it's appearing? And I don't have the answer to that. But it is interesting that, yeah, it's much more similar to like an alien type creature in the early sightings of it in Puerto Rico. Reptilian, spiny, large black eyes, on its hind legs, kind of kangaroo-like legs. And then, today when people talk about Chupacabra, they, basically it's like a starved, mangy coyote with no fur. So, then there's the question of, well, is that like disinformation that's put out there just to make people, relax about it? I don't know. But it is suspicious to me because obviously one has nothing to do with the other,
That's what I'm saying. So bizarre, my friend. Either it's just a common term, which technically skinwalkers and wendigos isn't supposed to be a common term, but we have mixed it up into this now. Same thing with Dogman, Skinwalker. Is this something maybe we have just as researchers put a
lumped it
spin
all
on this
together?
now? Yeah, that's what I'm kind of thinking, man.
Yeah, I don't know, and if we have, then I think it's sloppy to do so.
Agreed.
Yeah, because the first sightings, the first victims, which are animals, of course, not humans, but the first victims were in Puerto Rico, which is an island, as we all know. And then now there are sightings in like Mexico and the Southwest United States. Once again, a common culture, right? Kind of like we talked about the French and the Germans bringing the werewolf lore to America. This is a common shared culture. So if we're talking about like some sort of a psychic mental thought form that's being generated by the belief of thousands of people who now believe in this thing, and maybe that has something to do with it. But as I'm not a biologist, but as someone who understands biology, it's unlikely that this thing would have easily made its way to the mainland, across the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America now. But it's possible, right? It could have gotten on a ship. It could have been brought there by a evil agency. That it's not impossible. It's just not as easy as walking from point A to point B. So the creatures that are being sighted now in the Southwest are the ones that are, basically mangy coyotes. So, yeah.
Right? Doesn't make a ton of sense in regards of this thing being some sort of asset, I guess, because it doesn't really seem extraordinarily large. It gets deceased by people running over it. One woman, smoked it on her farm.
Yep.
Like Jody was saying, he makes some very interesting points about it. Why all of a sudden now is this, like we had just mentioned, the Chupacabra? It really just looks like some sort of canine with mange. I can't explain the blue eyes that people claim they see, I guess. Could it just have been coincidental? I don't know enough about animals, but I do know what huskies and things and other dogs have cool baby blue eyes, don't they?
Well,
I've seen those.
when animals and people are older or unhealthy, we develop cataracts in our eyes, and that's why, that's why you associate someone who's blind as having eyes that are kind of like milky colored,
Yes.
So animals are the same way. So maybe, if we're talking about these mangy coyotes that are obviously unhealthy, maybe they're, because their immune system's low, they're not, healing and regenerating as well as they should be. Maybe they're also going blind and developing those cataracts. So.
Wow.
Which could give them a paler, bluer color to their eyes. Yeah.
Wow. Epic right there. Again, I mean, from a scientific standpoint and the way the analytics and from the specimens I've had a chance to look at, yeah, sure, the teeth and things do look larger, but it's also looking like something that's malnourished, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
And
That goes along with malnourishment. Scurvy, right? Your gums recede because you don't have enough collagen, and I don't know if canines need vitamin C like we do, but vitamin C is a big part of the chain of protein and collagen synthesis in humans, at least, and so that's why when we don't have vitamin C for a long period of time, we develop scurvy. And it doesn't just affect your gums, it affects like your joints and other tissues. Basically the muscle and the tissue is not able to regenerate at nearly the rate that it's being destroyed just by wear and tear. So the gums recede, and then your teeth are going to look bigger because there's less gums, covering up the roots, and eventually the teeth fall out, right? But yeah, maybe the larger teeth are simply just receded gum lines.
Boom. You explained it much better than I would have been able to. But yes, that is pretty much the direction I was hinting at, which would explain the super abnormal long looking fangs. Yet those don't look like large specimens to me.
No.
I mean, Ken Gerhard put it up on a normal sized, quick little flip up table. It didn't look much larger than, per se, one of the neighbor's dogs I go hang out with. It didn't look like some crazy, huge Dogman thing, or I don't know. I just don't see how that could be attacking and damaging people. It looks like it's extremely ill, and it's pretty much on its last couple kicks, like you said. But how do you feel?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely think that that the specimens we're getting from the Southwest are just sick, mangy coyotes, and small dogs maybe, but probably just mostly sick, mangy coyotes. And yeah, we've talked about coyotes before. They're not much bigger than a small, medium-sized dog. 35 to 50 pounds, especially in the Southwest where there's less food and water. So yeah,
there's actually a very interesting canine that is more found in areas past Mexico, but they're also up here sometimes in Texas in very small numbers. May Koo, our spelunker and part of the science team, she was showing it to us. They're little mini looking dogs that have just recently been documented, or less. They're known, but they weren't fully known as if they were their own species until now. But it just shows you how elusive, and I'm not even sure, and nor is she, if they're purposely just trying to be elusive or there just isn't that many of them, which would explain the elusiveness. But if you were to, again, take away all that thing's fur and such and give it mange, that could also fall into what it is people are seeing too.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not terribly interested in those, mangy coyote sightings in the Southwest. I do think the reptilian creature spotted in the Puerto Rico, is far more interesting, because that's just different. That's hard to confuse with something else, right? So
when I started, kind of getting into some of the cool mysteries of stuff, when I was watching like Solved Mysteries and the X-Files, and Chupacabra, yeah, like you had just said, was described not as anything canine based at all. But now if I was to open my phone right now and type in El Chupacabra, the odds of the first image coming up is going to be something canine looking.
Right. And I mean, we're talking about like size wise, the initial sightings of it, it was described as being 3 to 4 feet tall. I mean, that's significantly bigger than these canines, that are being, claimed to be chupacabras. So yeah, I don't know how they got, like how we went from one to the other. It to me, it seems almost deliberate, But talking about the Southwest and weird reptilians, there have been sauropod sightings in the deserts of the Southwest in recent years. Sauropods being like two-legged, kind of predatory-looking dinosaur creatures. So you never know what's out in those deserts. But who knows if this chupacabra thing isn't some sort of large reptilian leftover from a different age that managed to survive on a tropical island, through the ice age and whatnot. It's that to me is far more interesting than mangy coyotes. Tell you what. So.
All right, that's more or less pretty much what Jody had stated about the topic as well. I just think it's important to bring, some clarity to people on it.
Yeah.
Consistently, it's just showed on the proof is out there. Monsters and Mysteries in America. Everywhere, these people are still churning that out. It's like, wait a second.
Yeah, and the original sightings and livestock that were, they had distinctive puncture marks on the chest where this creature was straining these sheep and goats of their blood. That's not coyote behavior. And you look at those dog things, basically we know they're coyotes. You look at the samples that have been collected, and how are they going to put 2 puncture marks into an animal's chest? You know how a dog bites, it would take a chunk out. It wouldn't just, shoot 2 fangs into the chest, forward of its mouth. So, to me, that's a totally different creature, totally different morphology,
Yeah, and excellent stuff right there. If you have a piece of paper beside you, I wanted to text you last night, but it was super early in the morning and I was just getting ready to pop into the good old casket. Before our next topic, we definitely need to talk the beast of Bladenboro down in North Carolina and that area. Look that up and remind me so I can send you some of the files that we have. But it falls into line with what you had just mentioned with some of the puncture marks. It would, per se, a large cat or hyena leave puncture marks like that on something? Or
sure, if they bit it, but you think about how a cat or a hyena jaw is. It's going to have its teeth on top and on bottom, so you wouldn't just have like 2 puncture marks. You'd in all likeliness have at least 4 from the canines, the pointy teeth. And then depending on how hard it bite, you'd have smaller punctures, more shallow punctures from the shorter teeth. So if these things are just leaving 2 punctures on the chest, that's a totally different jaw shape and totally different behavior than a big cat or anything we're familiar with.
Yes, again, excellent observations right there. Something that just potentially popped into my head is, unfortunately, I know in some of these areas there is a lot of dark worshiping of things.
Oh yeah,
Also,
yeah. There's a lot of spiritualism, is what they refer to it. Basically, it's Afro religions that were brought over by the former slaves, and mixed with elements of Christianity. A lot of times they did that to hide that they were still practicing their old beliefs. So they would use, say, Saint Christopher and a statue or a medal of him, but it would actually represent their the god of the harvest or the sun god or whatever, right? And so they would transfer their deities onto Catholic saints. That way they'd have all these saints in their house or wherever they were living, and it would look like they were being devout Catholics, but in reality they were actually doing rituals, basically like they did back home or like their grandparents did back home, and that continues on to this day. I encountered that actually recently in Brazil, but when I was living there long term when I was younger, it was very common. It's common in, as far as I know, in Puerto Rico. I think they call it Santeria there. It's common in Mexico. It's common all over. So yeah, I mean, it's voodoo in Louisiana or hoodoo,
So the reason I was thinking that potentially with the two marks per se that they thought were fang holes, let's say, could that not be in reality puncture marks from some sickos that are draining the blood?
Very much so. Yeah, that's a pretty good theory right there. In fact, in Puerto Rico, the first big make the news sighting happened in 1995, like you said. But in 1975, there were actually there was a large amount of livestock were happening in a small town in Puerto Rico, and no one saw what was doing it. And at the time, it was suspected to be like what they called a satanic cult that was doing the. So that's very possible that's still that was what did it, and that's still what's doing it. I know that in the Afro-Brazilian religions I encountered, they would sacrifice animals, chickens often because they're cheaper, but goats too, and dogs and stuff. So it's still very much a part of that whole belief system. Yeah.
Very interesting. Just as you were saying that, honestly, as a logical approach, it seems to be more logical to have that occurring per se than something like a vampire or unknown animal that specifically is just draining the blood, because a lot of people don't realize you have to have a very solidified and updated digestive system to be able to live off of that fluid because of all the metal bases inside of it and also the nutrients. That's why vampire bats are, as far as we know, the only species of animal that can consistently live off of blood. All right. Again, though, what predator just would leave a whole entire animal behind? I mean, like I said,
that doesn't make sense.
Cougars and things will lick up blood, but they're going to still eat the rest of the animal.
Yep, that's very true. And yeah, I mean, if like the original witnesses said, it's 3 to 4 feet tall, that's a big animal, and big animals need a lot of nutrition. And if you're just getting your nutrition from blood, that's fine. A goat probably has 2 gallons of blood in it, by my guess, which if you're adapted to that, that's gonna have a lot of calories and nutrition. But what evolutionary purpose does it serve to just feed off blood if you're that big? Why not meat? Why not eat the animal like other predators? So
that's just what I'm saying. It seems like it's a waste. I mean, did someone in every one of these cases interrupt it before it was done feeding? No, because some people found it the next morning. It had all night to come back and retrieve its prey. It just doesn't, from a standpoint of something that has to feed, which this thing is feeding. That
that's
means
the other thing.
Selling calories.
Something that only feeds off blood. If it's going to drain the creature whole, it has to do it relatively quickly, because blood's going to coagulate fairly quickly after, within a few hours. It won't be able to drain the blood anymore. It'll just, be a gelatin inside the veins. And so, you're talking about something that would then have to consume all that blood in a short amount of time. It seems a little inefficient. Vampire bats are different because they make a small incision and they secrete an anticoagulant so the incision doesn't clot up, and they sip some blood off the animal and they leave. They're not draining the animal dry,
Yes, and you can hold that thing in your hand.
Right, and they're small too, yeah. So
exactly, which again, something that's smaller doesn't need as much calories, etc. It just doesn't seemingly make sense to put a waste to it. It would be, again, I don't hunt. I know you have experience, but it would be like yourself going out and getting a buck, but then just taking the horns and the heart, but then leaving everything else.
Yeah, it's just not practical from a survival standpoint. Yeah, humans can do that. Humans can be wasteful because we're at this moment. At this moment in our development, we're not struggling to survive. We have an abundance, but in nature, most animals don't have an abundance. They're always on the edge of failure. So
again, very acute observations. It's just seemingly strange why the whole topic really kind of just took off. Everyone, again, doesn't look at it logically. Sure, would it be cool to an extent, I guess, if there was this crazy reptilian looking or large werewolf thing just sucking the goats dry of their blood? But if we're going to look at something from a logical aspect, if it was paranormal, it doesn't need to feed on the blood. It would be feeding on your energy and soul, etc. So that's out of the equation. It's feeding because it's hungry.
Yeah, it depends on, I do believe in, like, a lot of the paranormal entities probably are just feeding off our energy. A lot of magic rituals involve blood, because there's a strong belief that blood has power, that there is power in blood. And so, maybe throwing it out there that, if we're going to go down the totally supernatural route, hey, maybe there's some supernatural creature that can, directly feed off that power that's in the blood. I don't know, but
excellent observations right there as well, which again, I totally agree with you all on that fully, meaning if it was something that per se was summoned, I don't know too much about that aspect, and sure, now we're talking about something out of
a whole different
the
realm.
ordinary. Yep. Yeah, exactly, right? But if it is, again, even that, like you said, it seemingly wouldn't it be taking on bigger things like people or like cows and things, not just like chickens and goats? It just seemingly
fair question.
Seems like, I don't know, like you had mentioned with some of the dark rituals and such, an easy access to grab people's farm animals in the middle of the night. Again, I'm not saying that is fully what's occurring. It's just something that had kind of popped into my head.
Yeah, no, that was a good thought you had. I think you're onto something there.
How do you feel about it all in general? I mean, from your research and knowledge on the topic, I mean, do you think something is occurring there, or do you think there's a lot of different things being mixed up? Maybe some of the messed up stuff we just spoke about, and actually maybe some sort of paranormal or alien type stuff, or where do you sit?
Yeah, I think I'd lean in the more than likely chance that it's man-made. Then a small percent chance that it's maybe the same phenomenon that's like mutilating cattle and leaving them drained of blood, and with organs cut out and stuff surgically. But I think more than likely it's like we were talking about, occult activity would be my guess. So
very interesting right there as well. Same thing with actually the cattle mutilation, as you brought that up. I heard some really interesting stuff about that with some of the outbreaks of the cattle diseases that would affect, a lot of revenue, etc. Well, they were trying to keep it under wraps more or less, and obviously farmers and things aren't going to be okay with people just coming over and taking areas from their livestock to test them for these diseases. Yet in a lot of these cases, the areas that were removed were the areas that would be most susceptible to be able to test for these type of diseases.
I see.
Yeah. So again, when people say, hey, they see these black helicopters or black SUVs. It doesn't mean Men in Black, right? The movie, okay? What I'm trying to say here is it's no different with anything. Are you going to just enunciate when you show up, all right? I mean, even the local PD have all decked out black, per
Yeah,
se,
maybe you're right.
SUVs and
Maybe it was
such.
some federal or state agency that got a warrant, to go and take these samples against the rancher's will, and they do it, in the night so they don't have a confrontation.
Right, exactly. Because if you just appeared right in a normal chopper in the middle of the day, I've heard the stories about how farmers just shoot at helicopters over there because they're fed up with these things occurring. And I
Sure.
also had heard some of the people that were claiming they worked on this, which is, one of the reasons I was able to, explain it to you, that they don't really like when they fly over things and check on them. They shoot at them all the time, which okay, makes sense. But again, sure, middle of the night, you need to test something real quick. You are going to come down in a black helicopter, most likely conceal yourself.
Yeah,
Sure.
maybe that's a theory I hadn't considered or heard of, but it has merit for sure. Yeah.
Pretty interesting, right? Again,
Yeah.
because I mean, when you're thinking about the cows and such, the parts that are being removed, if people want to dive in, say with the UFO and alien stuff, I've kind of, gave my thought on that before. That would be a whole big waste of them to come down and just remove a couple of this and that. We're talking about supposedly beings that are way more superior than us that are what? We're sampling cows. Not saying that's not what's occurring. That's just not what I feel like is occurring.
No,
It's
I
just,
agree with you. It's like, do they need to sample them over and over and over again? You'd think if they were gathering samples, one or two would be enough. So yeah, I agree with you
yeah.
there.
And again, predators and such, what are they just going to eat little special parts? I mean, is this like some gourmet bears and cougars that are just like, super prissy? Like you said, nah, I'm not really feeling the rest of this, cow right now. I'm just going to eat a little bit of here, a little bit of there. But like you said, over and over again, why? Well, what would need to be tested over and over again? Something that you'd be trying to figure out if it's actually occurring or not.
Right. Yeah. In multiple locations over multiple
Mm-hmm.
years. That makes some sense for sure.
Right, my friend, and you had just tweaked it into my head when you had talked about some of the other things, and I'd wanted to mention that to you quite a while ago. It's just interesting, and that's what I mean about being an investigative photojournalist. You just always got to bring things forth and look at them. If something has some sort of steam, does it mean at the end of the little investigation we're doing that it has to still sit and stand? No, but if it has a little bit of credence to it, per
Yeah.
se, it needs to be looked at, right?
Yeah, exactly. You need to play with it in your head, look it over, consider it. Yeah, I like that. And I like the ideas you're coming up with.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate you, bro. That reminded me the other day, like you were always saying about the bad and good science. There is this gentleman that has all the fancy, little letters in front of his name. He's extremely successful, but he was trying to pitch and still is calling it a theory, but and most people don't think it's even past the hypothesis stage because there's nothing to really support it besides certain things that he's cherry picking out of what is already been presented, kind of like, when people in cases leave out certain details so it figures and fits into the other one. Well, he's doing this with Neanderthals basically because his spin is that they were extremely hairy and more ape looking than we have perceived they were, and that they were actually more
the super
carnivorous
predator
towards us.
Yeah, the super predator theory. Yeah.
But the problem is he doesn't really have that much to stand on. It's interesting, but
Sure.
he's just kind of only picking and choosing the things he's putting forward, and then forgetting on purpose to leave out other information that would kind of contradict his statements,
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with that. I watched the YouTube videos that were put out about that. It's certainly a scary idea and a terrifying idea, and it's kind of fun to think that that's why we're afraid of the dark, and all that. But I agree with you. There's very little actual evidence for it. I mean, of course, we don't know a whole lot about Neanderthals aside from the the bone fragments and the tools we found of them. So he's basically creating a whole story from that. Other scientists have created, the more commonly accepted story from it. And, the fact of the matter is, either one's really just a guess, as to what they look like and how they behaved. We do know that, especially Europeans and Northern Asians do contain some small percentage of Neanderthal DNA. But so obviously there was some interbreeding, whether that was consensual or non-consensual, we don't know. But it happened enough that it still multiple, how many, 100 generations, 500 generations later, it still shows up in our DNA. But that's really all we know about them. We don't know if we traded with them, if we, interacted with them on a peaceful level, or if they hunted us, So yeah, it's all just conjecture and theory.
Which, again, excellent observation from you on all aspects right there. It is intriguing and interesting, like you said, and as, I was listening, again, assumptions aren't the best, but I'm assuming the same videos and things you had heard, at least a couple of them in bed before I pass out. I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
As your mind wanders, you're like, yeah, that's some pretty gnarly stuff. Yeah, sure. We do see things that are pareidolia based, and also, what is that word as well? Anthropomorphism, where we have to project human traits on everything to describe it. Where did that come from? Well, obviously evolutionary paths. It's like we said before, you show these children that can't speak yet, that are with their parents, with these scientists, predators, they cry. You show them butterflies and things, they smile and laugh. All right, why is a child that can't even articulate words yet, who, unless they have the worst parents in the world, have never seen giant spiders or huge carnivorous looking cats, but as soon as they see that, they're traumatized?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a fourth grade teacher who told us that humans are the only species with no instincts, and that didn't sound right to me. That didn't sound right to me at the time, and now I know for certain that it's not right. I mean, so much of what we do socially is instinctual. Our relationships are instinctual. Our mating is instinctual. So, we have instincts. It's just we have a higher level of intelligence where sometimes we can brute force our way through our instincts, and that fear is an instinct, the fear of the dark, the fear of a predator, because the humans from our past that didn't have the fear of the big cat or the snarling wolf or the bear, well, they may not have passed on their genes as successfully before they got eaten. So yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot there, and it's important for us to realize that we are animals to an extent. We're extremely intelligent animals, but we are animals, and a lot of our instincts have there's a good reason why we have them. But of course, in the modern age, we have to temper that with, societal norms and what's expected of us. You may have an instinct to punch someone in the face when they get aggressive with you, but nowadays you're going to get charged with assault unless you were assaulted first, right? So, we do have to temper it, but at the same time, I think humans have gotten pretty disconnected. At least humans in the developed world have gotten pretty disconnected from a lot of those safety measures that nature programmed into us through survival of the fittest. And it's good to touch base with them there, even if we have to deny them, more frequently in the modern world,
Well, better to be safe than sorry, right? Meaning,
right.
Like you said, you would be winning the Darwinism award for not survival if you just.
Well, shoot, not to get like political or critical of people who die, but just a few years ago, there was a couple in my age group, millennials, who decided they were going to show that certain areas of the world that are known to be terrorist havens and have very violent people were totally safe and peaceful, and they decided to go like biking across several of these countries. And then, lo and behold, a few weeks later, comes up on the news that they were by terrorists. Where were their survival instincts? They overcame what should have naturally been a survival instinct that said, "Hey, this is a dumb idea, very dangerous," because of the societal programming that they had experienced, which told them that all human beings are good human beings, and if we just treat everyone with respect, we'll be treated with respect. And that's a nice thought, and it works well, at least where I live, but it doesn't necessarily work well everywhere, And so you have to temper that, with reality sometimes.
I know that case you're talking about, unfortunately, because back when I find those things very interesting, but I try to keep a positive vibe, So, I mean, obviously, researching the missing people is enough. So I try not to really go purposely out of my way to watch or listen for those, but there used to be a couple threads I would listen to, like Scary Interesting, and some others that would cover some things like that. And I had heard that particular case. And like you had just said, it's good to overcome your fear in things, but then there's a point in time where you got to realize that, wait a second, this stomach feeling is real. And actually, you're going to like this. Some other really brilliant minds were saying the reason we feel that is because the bacterias and things that are in our gut are actually alive, and they want to stay alive as well, which is why they're telling you get the F out of there.
The gut-mind axis. Yeah, no, there's a lot of new research into that. I don't know that necessarily that they go in the direction of the bacteria are talking to you, but there's a big connection between our stomachs and our brains. And that's an interesting slant on that. I like it.
Right? Yes, because again, I mean, why is it just our inner stomach that has something living in us basically being like, yo, go? Because you're not listening to your brain. You're not listening to your other senses. Well, maybe this will listen to you.
Well, the ancients thought that, that our brain, that our thinking organ was actually our heart, or at least in our chest. And so, maybe they were just a little too high. Maybe it's actually our stomach.
Right. I mean, they always do say you can't listen to one or the other. I mean, if you just listen to your heart and not your brain, because you're always going to have some sort of conflict. I mean, again, we're here to talk about different things than love and romance, but I mean, that would be an example with your heart. You're like, oh, I want to be with this girl so bad, but then your brain's like, every red flag I've just seen, I can't ignore this. And your heart's like, yeah, sure you can. No, I can't.
Yep. See, instinct versus, wisdom there. And sometimes we don't, a lot of times we don't use our brains. So, but I do think that if people learn to be in tune with their natural man as well as their modern man, and learn when one needs to take over and when the other should take over, because there are situations where, when you're run into a bear on the trail, you should probably go with your gut instinct, with your what your body tells you to do, right? But when you're in the boardroom at your job, you should probably go with what your brain tells you to do. So if we learn to listen to each one in the right circumstances, I think that we'll be more successful in more scenarios, for sure.
Isn't that epic? I love your reference too, before we do start to tie this up, where you're like, all right, well, obviously, if you're in a certain area, let's be realistic first. And you use the example of, if you're in Ohio, you think of horses and not zebras.
Yeah.
But like the other day, I was using that similar reference.
Yep. Absolutely. Pattern recognition. That's a big part of our human instinct, is pattern recognition. And sometimes it's wrong, but basically it's your brain's shortcut, so it doesn't have to spend, 10 times more time processing and making a decision about what really happened. Instead, it's kind of like AI. It jumps to a conclusion. And like I said, a lot of times that's right. Sometimes it's wrong, right? But pattern recognition is a big part of, what makes us human, really. And oftentimes it's part of what people tell us is wrong with us. Oh, don't think that. Not all things are like that. It's like, well, my pattern recognition says it is, but I could be wrong. But usually I'm right? So.
Yes. No, this is true. I mean, you call a thing if you weren't right. The majority of the time, I wouldn't have you in the position you are, because I take basically not commands, but I mean, I take lessons from you more or less. So.
Yep. Well, I appreciate that.
No, I appreciate you, my friend. Well, as we are starting to tie this up on a final note, where do you sit with the El Chupacabra then? I mean, do you think it's something we should maybe pump the
I really-
brakes on, certainly?
Yeah,
or-
I think it's a pump the brakes sort of thing until there's more concrete sightings of things that aren't mangy coyotes. I think I'm gonna put it in the probably not a thing category.
Boom. I'm right there with you, which is why I really wanted to sit down tonight and talk about it, because there are some pretty cool channels that cover some things. And one of them I've been watching was the Mythical Mug Tavern. He just covers all kinds of interesting stuff, but I just noticed a very large pattern. And I don't know why I just started churning last night in the good old hamster cage upstairs, like my uncle says, but I was like, wait a second. I'm pretty dang sure when I first started learning about the El Chupacabra, and remember that old school show that I think it was Animal Planet, Lost Tapes? Do you remember that?
Yep.
Yes. So cool, but so not real at all. But I mean, again,
Yeah.
even in that, though, the Chupacabra wasn't a canine. But then, like I said, all of a sudden I started noticing the whole purple, blue-eyed coming up everywhere. And I was like, all right, well, we're obviously missing something here. And that's why I wanted to talk about that tonight for sure.
Yep. No, it's a good topic to talk about.
Appreciate you, my friend. Well, on a final note, would you like to mention anything else before we let you get rolling?
I think this is a good example of what we've talked about in the past of keeping your brain open, but not so open that it falls out. You know, being willing to take in new ideas, judge them, consider them, talk about them, and kind of get a feel for whether or not you think they have merit or not. And I think that's what we did tonight. So, if someone disagrees with us, hey, let us know in the comments. But I think that's where we stand. So.
Excellent. And yes, William will be back again in a few weeks. So we will always be able to answer questions and things. And actually, again, another little interesting tidbit of why it's important to eat healthy to everybody out there. If you look at the way the brain was set up thousands of years ago, it actually had natural oils from the nuts and things you were eating and the fish inside of your brain. But now today, with the way the majority of people eat, it is no longer natural oils in your brain. It's like all this byproduct. Interestingly different.
Worse than that. They recently have done a study on, like, I don't know how many, but a large amount of cadaver brains. Yep. And on average, they have between, I believe it's either 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 grams, which is not an insignificant amount of microplastics in the brain now.
Jeez,
it's kind of scary to think about. Like, what is that doing to the connections between our neurons? Is that affecting how efficiently messages are getting transmitted through that whole process in our brain? I don't know. But
plastics everywhere, dude. What the Christmas trees? That's insane. Yeah. Yep. Boom. So right there to everybody, make sure you do. Be careful with what you're consuming. Treat your body like a temple. Put in it what you want and be good to it. Yeah.
I'm not a licensed health consultant or anything, but my general rule is buy your food from the outside of the grocery store, like the outside ring of the grocery store. Mm-hmm. I don't eat hardly anything that comes in a package. It's fresh fruits and vegetables, meat, eggs, dairy.
Things you got to cook, man. Yes.
Things that you know what they are. Yeah, for sure.
I don't even use the microwave too much if possible, brother. I will just use the oven real quick in a saute pan, man.
If you do use the microwave, don't put the food you're heating up in plastic.
Yep.
Even if it's microwave safe, it's not. So, ceramic, but not plastic.
Excellent stuff again. Yet to the audience, we do need to allow our scientist, Mr. William White, to get back to his family and other things he does need to attend to. We would love to have him sit here and keep on spewing out excellent information to indulge in. Yet, well, it doesn't roll like that. He will be back in a few weeks, though, no worries. And you can check out our previous content in the good old playlist down below. Yet, until then, this will be the conclusion of the meeting of the Midnight Society for the early hours of the morning. William's wife and family does need him back. Thanks for hanging out tonight, man. Appreciate you.
Hey, no problem. It was a fun conversation.
Oh, my creatures of the night, I do adore every single one of you. And thank you for popping in tonight. Please like, comment, subscribe, share the facts and the truth to the algorithm. We will catch you on the next one.